The Ice King Alexander Reed surveyed Manhattan from his penthouse office, 58 floors removed from the ordinary world. At 38, he'd built Titan Development into a real estate empire that reshaped skylines across 3 continents. The November rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside everything remained perfectly controlled, like Alexander himself. "The Brighton Heights proposal needs revisions," he said, not bothering to look at his CFO, who shifted uncomfortably. "Their affordable housing component takes up too much valuable square footage." "But, sir, it's the minimum required by—" "I don't pay you to tell me about requirements, James. I pay you to find ways around them." Alexander's voice remained level, almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "Have it on my desk tomorrow." The CFO nodded and retreated. Outside, his executive assistant, Vanessa, exchanged knowing glances with James. Alexander pretended not to notice. He was used to the whispers. "The Ice King," they called him when they thought he couldn't hear. Cold, calculating, brilliant. Alone. He preferred it that way. Relationships were inefficient. Emotions were liabilities. His parents' toxic marriage had taught him that before he'd turned 10. By 30, he'd perfected the art of keeping everyone at arm's length, even his occasional companions who never stayed past sunrise. That evening, his driver called with car trouble. Alexander dismissed his concern. He'd take the subway home, an unusual choice that felt oddly fitting given his restless mood. The financial report from London had shown another record quarter. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, emptiness gnawed at him. At the 68th Street station, the skies opened up. Alexander ducked under the awning of a small art gallery, annoyed at the weather's audacity to disrupt his evening. That's when he noticed her. A woman stood just inside the gallery's entrance, frantically trying to save a canvas from water damage. The gallery appeared closed, yet she worked with desperate intensity, auburn hair falling across her face as she struggled with the large painting. "Can I help?" Alexander found himself asking, surprising himself. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were striking, amber brown and slightly red-rimmed, as though she'd been crying before the rain had even started. "The ceiling's leaking," she explained, her voice strained. "These are for tomorrow's exhibition. My first solo show, and now—" Her voice caught as she gestured to water stains forming on the gallery ceiling. Alexander stepped inside without invitation, removed his cashmere coat, and carefully covered a stack of smaller canvases. "Show me where the worst leaks are." For the next hour, Alexander Reed, who hadn't performed manual labor since college, found himself moving paintings, arranging tarps, and eventually climbing a questionable ladder to help this stranger secure plastic sheeting over the worst of the ceiling damage. His bespoke suit was ruined, his Italian leather shoes beyond salvation. "I'm Olivia, by the way. Olivia Chen." She extended her hand once they'd saved what they could. Her fingers were paint-stained and calloused, strong despite their slenderness. "Alexander Reed!" Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Reed, as in Titan Development?" He nodded, suddenly uncomfortable. People's expressions typically changed when they placed his name. Awe, calculation, or thinly disguised resentment, replacing whatever genuine interaction had existed before. "Your company just bought this building," she said quietly. "The owners are tripling our rent next month. After 5 years, this gallery will close, and my exhibition tomorrow will be the last one ever held here." Alexander froze. He recalled the acquisition vaguely, a package deal, small properties bundled together for redevelopment. He hadn't considered what businesses currently occupied them. "I didn't know," he said, the words inadequate even to his own ears. "Would it have mattered if you did?" Olivia asked, no accusation in her voice, just weary resignation. A single tear slipped down her cheek, mingling with a splash of rainwater from her hair. Something unfamiliar twisted in Alexander's chest. For the first time in years, he had no calculated response, no practiced deflection. He just stood there, dripping onto the gallery floor, watching a stranger cry over something he had carelessly destroyed. And for reasons he couldn't explain, it mattered more than anything had in a very long time. Fractured defenses, Alexander couldn't explain why he returned to the gallery the next evening. He told himself it was curiosity, perhaps guilt, but nothing more. Yet he found himself standing at the back of the crowded space, watching as Olivia moved through her exhibition, her green dress catching the light as she spoke passionately about her work. Her paintings were unlike anything in his meticulously curated collection, vibrant urban scenes capturing moments of unexpected beauty in forgotten corners of the city. Homeless men sharing coffee on a bench, children playing in the spray of a broken hydrant, an elderly couple dancing to a street musician's melody. They're not polished enough for your taste, I imagine. The voice belonged to a young man with kind eyes who appeared beside him. I'm sorry? I'm Marcus, Olivia's brother. And you're Alexander Reed. I recognized you from Forbes. He smiled without hostility. Liv told me about last night. Said you ruined a suit that probably cost more than all the paintings in this room combined. Alexander found himself uncomfortable with the observation. The paintings are remarkable. They're honest, Marcus replied. That's Liv for you. She sees beauty where most people don't bother looking. Later, when the crowd thinned, Olivia approached him, surprise evident in her expression. You came, she said. I wanted to see if the ceiling held, he replied, attempting lightness. Her smile was tentative. And to remind yourself what you're demolishing? The directness caught him off guard. In his world, people circled truths delicately, wrapping criticisms in layers of deference. Olivia Chen spoke without filters. Actually, he found himself saying, I've been reconsidering that particular development. Her eyebrows rose skeptically. Because of one leaky ceiling and some paintings? Because I realized I never looked at what was already here, he admitted. Their conversation continued over impromptu glasses of cheap wine after the exhibition closed. She told him about teaching art to children in the neighborhood, about her struggles to make rent while pursuing her passion. He found himself listening, truly listening, rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. Your world and mine don't typically intersect, Olivia said as they stood outside in the gentler evening rain. What are you really doing here, Alexander? He had no practiced answer, no strategic response. I don't know, he admitted, the unfamiliar truth strange on his tongue. Over the next weeks, Alexander found himself creating reasons to be near the gallery. He established a temporary office nearby to personally oversee the neighborhood development project. His executive team was baffled by his sudden interest in a relatively minor acquisition. Only Vanessa, his assistant of 8 years, dared to comment. Something's different about you lately, she observed, placing reports on his desk. You canceled the Singapore meeting to attend a community board hearing. You're actually reading tenant impact assessments. I'm being thorough, he replied stiffly. Vanessa's knowing look made it clear she wasn't convinced. The Chen girl's exhibition catalog was delivered. I've left it on your desk. He found himself studying Olivia's paintings after hours, alone in his office. One piece particularly haunted him. A solitary figure in a glass tower, surrounded by the city lights but separated from them, looking out at a world they couldn't touch. He recognized himself in that isolated silhouette. During a community meeting about the redevelopment, Alexander watched Olivia passionately defend the neighborhood's character. Unlike other activists, she didn't vilify him or tighten development. Instead, she spoke of possibility, of compromise, of reimagining success to include more than just profit margins. Buildings should serve people, she argued, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness addressing the crowded room. Not just investors. Later, he found her sitting alone on the steps outside the community center. Your speech was compelling, he said, sitting beside her. But not compelling enough to change anything, she replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. Actually, it was. Alexander surprised himself with the words. I've instructed my team to revise the plans. The gallery stays with a 10-year fixed lease. The surrounding buildings will be renovated, not demolished. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? It's still profitable, he deflected. Just differently. But they both knew it wasn't about the money. Something was shifting in Alexander Reed. Hairline fractures appearing in carefully constructed walls. For the first time in decades, he was making decisions that couldn't be justified on a balance sheet, and it terrified him. Warmth in the cold December arrived with the first heavy snowfall of the season. Alexander found himself walking through Washington Square Park, where he'd agreed to meet Olivia. The past month had brought changes he couldn't have anticipated. Revised development plans that preserved the neighborhood's character while still satisfying his investors, and regular conversations with a woman who constantly challenged his worldview. He spotted her by the fountain, bundled in a well-worn red coat, sketching a group of chess players huddled at the stone tables. Her nose and cheeks were pink with cold, her breath forming clouds in the winter air. Something warm unfurled in his chest at the sight. "You're smiling," Olivia observed as he approached. "It looks good on you." "I received some unexpected news," he replied, settling beside her. "The community board approved our revised plans unanimously." Her eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. See what happens when the great Alexander Reed actually listens?" There was teasing in her voice, but no malice. That was Olivia, direct, but never cruel. During their growing friendship, she'd never treated him with the deference he was accustomed to, nor the resentment he often encountered from those who opposed his developments. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his coat. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a contract establishing a community arts fund, with the gallery as its permanent home. Olivia read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. "Alexander, this is—" She looked up, eyes shining. "Why?" "It makes business sense," he said, falling back on the language he understood. "Cultural investments improve neighborhood values. Is that really why?" She challenged gently. The truth was more complicated than he was ready to admit. Something about Olivia had awakened parts of himself he'd long ago buried. The idealistic young man who'd wanted to build spaces that mattered. Before profit margins and shareholder expectations had narrowed his vision, their afternoon stretched into evening. They walked through the snow-covered streets, stopping at a small Italian restaurant where the owner greeted Olivia by name. Alexander watched as she chatted easily with the waitstaff, remembering details about their lives he would have never bothered to learn. "You see people?" he observed over dinner. "Really see them?" "Everyone deserves to be seen," she replied simply. "Even billionaires who pretend they don't need anyone." The comment hit closer to home than she knew. Later, when he insisted on walking her to her apartment in Brooklyn, a fifth-floor walk-up that probably fit into his master bathroom, she invited him in for coffee. Her home was small but alive in a way his penthouse had never been. Paintings lined the walls, some hers, others from artist friends. Books were stacked beside a well-worn couch. Plants thrived on every available surface. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect," he replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. When their hands touched as she passed him a coffee mug, neither pulled away immediately. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Later, as they talked late into the night, Alexander realized he'd shared more of himself in these hours than he had with anyone in years. His parents' toxic relationship, the loneliness of his success, his fading connection to the passion that had once driven him. "Why are you telling me all this?" Olivia asked softly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never talked about these things with anyone. Maybe you needed someone to listen." As a light snow began falling outside her window, Alexander recognized the dangerous warmth growing inside him, feelings he'd carefully avoided for most of his adult life, attachment, connection, desire that went beyond the physical. When he finally left her apartment, the cold air should have been a relief. Instead, he felt the absence of her warmth acutely. Back in his immaculate penthouse, Alexander moved through the silent rooms, seeing them through new eyes. The space felt hollow, a showcase rather than a home. On impulse, he unpacked the small painting Olivia had given him, a simple scene of two people sharing coffee in the window of a cafe, their faces alight with conversation. He hung it in his bedroom, the vibrant colors standing in stark contrast to the carefully neutral palette of the space. It was out of place, disruptive to the meticulous design, just like the feelings he could no longer deny. Melting point January brought record-breaking cold to the city. As temperatures plummeted, Alexander found himself drawn more frequently to the warmth of Olivia's company. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had named, but both felt shifting beneath the surface. More than friendship, edging toward territory Alexander had never allowed himself to explore. During a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum, he found his attention continually drifting from business conversations to watch Olivia, who he'd impulsively invited as his guest. She moved through the crowd in a borrowed gown, more captivated by the artwork than the powerful people surrounding her. "She's not like your usual companions," observed Elise Warner, his longtime business rival appearing beside him with champagne in hand. "Quite refreshing, actually, though I wonder what the board would think about your interest in a struggling artist from Brooklyn." "My personal life isn't board business," Alexander replied coolly. Elise smiled. "Everything is board business when you're the face of Titan, darling. Especially with the Westbridge merger negotiations so delicate, the reminder was unwelcome. The Westbridge deal represented everything Alexander had worked toward for years: international expansion, unprecedented growth, a legacy cemented in steel and glass. The conservative family behind Westbridge placed high value on traditional appearances and stability. Later that evening, as his driver took them back to Olivia's apartment, he found himself uncharacteristically quiet. "Everything okay?" she asked, her hand light on his arm. "You've been somewhere else since we left the museum." "Just business matters," he deflected. She studied his face in the passing streetlights. "You know, for someone who negotiates billion-dollar deals, you're remarkably bad at hiding your thoughts." The observation startled a laugh from him. "Only with you," he admitted. When they reached her building, he walked her to her door. The tension between them had been building for weeks. Lingering touches, conversations that stretched into the early hours, a growing reluctance to part. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, her voice soft in the dimly lit hallway. What happened next felt inevitable. His hands cupping her face, her fingers threading through his hair as their lips met, in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with weeks of unspoken longing. They moved inside her apartment, shedding coats and barriers with equal urgency. In the soft lamplight of her bedroom, Alexander discovered vulnerabilities he'd never allowed himself to show anyone. Olivia's touch was both tender and passionate, her body fitting against his, as though they'd been designed as complementary pieces. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander surrendered control completely, losing himself in sensations that went beyond the physical. Connection, trust, a wholeness he hadn't known he was missing. Afterward, lying tangled in her mismatched sheets, Olivia traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "You're still thinking too much," she murmured. "Old habits," he replied, pulling her closer. "Tell me." The request was simple, but it opened something in him. "This isn't... I don't do this. Relationships, attachments." "I noticed," she said with a slight smile. "The great Alexander Reed married to his empire. It was safer that way. And now?" He had no answer that wouldn't expose too much of his heart. Instead, he kissed her again, letting his body communicate what he couldn't yet say. The following weeks brought a happiness Alexander had never allowed himself to imagine, but also complications he couldn't ignore. The board's concerns about his distraction grew more pointed. The Westbridge family expressed reservations about his changing public image. His executive team struggled to reconcile their ruthless leader with the man who now considered community impact before profit margins. The breaking point came when leaked. Photos of Alexander and Olivia appeared in financial publications, accompanied by speculation about his commitment to the Westbridge merger. His phone rang constantly with concerned investors and board members. "This isn't sustainable," he told himself, staring at the reports showing potential shareholder losses if the merger fell through. When Olivia arrived at his penthouse that evening, she immediately sensed his withdrawal. "What's happening?" she asked directly. "You've been distant all week." "The Westbridge deal is complicated," he began. "And I'm complicating it," she finished, understanding immediately. "Because I don't fit into your world." "That's not..." "It is," she interrupted gently. "I've always known we come from different places, Alexander. The question is whether that matters more than what's happening between us." the truth hung between them. He stood at a crossroads between the life he'd built and the one he was beginning to want. For a man who made billion-dollar decisions daily, this choice paralyzed him completely. "I need time," he said finally. The hurt in her eyes was swift but quickly masked. "Take all you need," she replied, gathering her coat. "But don't take too long. Some choices don't wait forever." As the door closed behind her, the penthouse felt colder than ever. Spring arrives February turned to March, and the first hints of spring appeared in Central Park. Alexander moved through his days with mechanical precision, throwing himself into the Westbridge negotiations with renewed focus. The merger proceeded as planned. The board was pleased. His empire expanded, and he was miserable. "You look terrible," Vanessa informed him bluntly one morning, placing his coffee on his desk. After a decade as his assistant, she'd earned the right to occasional honesty. "Thank you for that assessment," he replied dryly. "You haven't spoken to her, have you?" Alexander didn't pretend to misunderstand. "The Westbridge deal closes next week. Everything is proceeding as planned," Vanessa sighed. "Is this really what you want, sir?" "The Alexander Reed I've worked for these past 10 years always knew exactly what he wanted and went after it without hesitation." The observation lingered after she left. That evening, instead of returning to his penthouse, Alexander found himself walking through the neighborhood surrounding Olivia's gallery. The area looked different now, the buildings renovated rather than replaced. Small businesses thriving where chain stores might have stood. The character preserved while infrastructure improved. His phone rang. Harold Westbridge, patriarch of the family he was merging with. "Reed!" Harold's voice was gruff. "I've been reviewing the community development initiative your team proposed." Alexander tensed. The initiative, incorporating affordable housing and arts funding into future developments, had been his personal project, inspired by Olivia, but carried forward even after their separation. "It's quite contrary to our usual approach," Harold continued. "It's financially sound," Alexander defended. "Community investment yields stable returns and—" "I wasn't criticizing," Harold interrupted. "It's actually rather brilliant. Sustainable, both socially and financially. My granddaughter has been pushing for something similar for years." The conversation continued, with Harold expressing more enthusiasm for these new directions than Alexander had anticipated. After hanging up, he stood in the growing twilight, a realization dawning with painful clarity. He'd been ready to sacrifice what mattered most for a deal with people who might have valued exactly what he was giving up. Without conscious decision, his feet carried him toward Olivia's building. He hadn't spoken to her in 6 weeks, the longest 6 weeks of his life. When she opened her door, surprise and wariness battled in her expression. "Alexander." "I've been a fool," he said simply. Her smile was sad. "That's not news. I thought I had to choose between the life I built and the life I want. Between success and happiness, between my world and yours." The words tumbled out, unplanned and honest. But that was never the real choice. What was? "Between fear and love." The word he'd been avoiding hung between them. "I've been afraid my entire adult life. Afraid of becoming my parents. Afraid of needing someone and losing them. Afraid that everything I built could disappear." Olivia leaned against the doorframe, neither inviting him in nor sending him away. "And now I'm more afraid of losing you than anything else." He took a step closer. "The Westbridge family actually loves the community initiative you inspired. They want to expand it. Everything I was afraid would fall apart is stronger with the principles you taught me." "I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know somewhere inside," she replied softly. "You just forgot how to listen to that part of yourself." "Then thank you for helping me remember." Alexander reached for her hands, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. "I'm not asking you to fit into my world," he continued. "I'm asking if we can build something new together, something that takes the best of both." For a long moment, Olivia studied his face. Then slowly she smiled. "That depends. Is Alexander Reed finally admitting he needs someone else?" "Not someone else," he corrected, drawing her closer. "You." specifically and uniquely you. As their lips met, a gentle rain began to fall, the first spring shower washing away the last traces of winter. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, they watched the rain pattern Olivia's window, making plans for futures neither had imagined possible months before. "You know," Olivia murmured against his chest, "I painted you once, before I even knew you. A man in a tower surrounded by lights but separated from the world. I remember. I have it in my office now." She looked up, surprised. "Why that one?" "Because even then you saw me," he replied, stroking her hair. "The real me, behind all the walls." In the morning, they walked together through the rain-washed streets hand in hand. The city sparkled around them, familiar yet somehow new, just as Alexander himself felt transformed yet more authentically himself than he'd been in decades. Near the park, they passed a small cafe with wide windows. Inside, two people sat deep in conversation, leaning toward each other as if nothing else in the world existed. Alexander recognized the scene instantly from the painting that now hung in his bedroom. "Life imitating art," he observed. Olivia smiled up at him. "Or maybe I just painted what I hoped we'd find." As they continued walking into the bright spring morning, Alexander Reed, who had built an empire of glass and steel but forgotten how to build a life, finally understood the difference between success and fulfillment. In the reflection of Olivia's eyes, he saw not the powerful man the world knew, but the man he was finally becoming. Whole, human, and no longer afraid to love.